Hey, good morning, Facebook friends and family, and followers of Shining Light Baptist Church. Pastor Kevin here, and here for Light for the Day. And I'm excited to see what God has in store through this devotional. Thank you to Pastor for allowing me to speak this morning. And we're going to be looking in the book of Esther. Now, Esther is one of my favorite books. I say that about a lot of the books of the Bible. But I love it. I think it's an awesome book because God's name is never mentioned throughout the book, yet all throughout the story, all throughout the chapters of this book, we see God's hand, His provision, His guidance, His sovereignty, His protection, and all throughout those pages, the words and the chapters and verses, we see God, yet His name is never mentioned. And so I love this book. I think it's an awesome story. And we're going to be looking in chapter 4, just one verse this morning. But I want to give you a short little synopsis of the previous chapters to bring us up to date, and I'll try to do it real fast. In chapter 1, we have King Ahasuerus and Queen Vashti, and King Ahasuerus has this big party, and he wants to display his queen, and Vashti says no, and I won't get into the right and wrongs of that, but he says, all right, you're out of here. And so she's out, and the king's looking for a new bride. And so chapter 2 starts out, and he sends out all his servants to look for fair maidens to come and be his bride. And they go looking far and wide, and they bring these young ladies, these virgins, these women, and they're put on almost a display. It's almost like a competition. And so all these women come before, and they try to earn the love of King Ahasuerus. And Esther is the one that King Ahasuerus chooses. And us looking at in the outside, we can see God's plan through it, but you can imagine Esther doesn't know why she's chosen. She just thinks, well, the king loves me. Then in chapter 3, Haman, a trusted warrior or man that King Ahasuerus trusts, he receives power, and he's going around strutting his authority, and people are bowing down to him, and he loves it. His pride is lifted up. And Mordecai, a Jew, doesn't bow down because, of course, Mordecai believes in God and not bowing down to men. And Haman is distraught. He cannot believe that Mordecai won't bow down. And so Haman devises up this plan. I'm going to have all the Jews killed. I'm going to get my revenge on Mordecai by having all of his people destroyed. And Mordecai hears of this plan, and he is, probably distraught in himself, and he tells Esther and says, Esther, you're a Jew too. You're going to die with all of us. And that brings us up to chapter 4, where we're going to be looking at one verse, and it's verse 14. I'm going to read it for us today. It says, and it's Mordecai talking to Esther. He says, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, saying, if you don't go and do something about this, then shall their enlargement and the deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou in thy father's house shall be destroyed. Then he goes on to say this, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Mordecai says to Esther, he says, you have been placed in this position for a certain thing. Who knows if you've been placed in a time for you to intercede on the Jews' behalf. For such a time as this, Esther was placed into a position of authority, a position of communion with the king, so that she would be able to change the narrative, change the story from where the Jews are getting destroyed to where they are free. And the application to this for each one of us today is God has placed each of us for such a time as this. We live in a time where things are going pretty rough. People are distraught. People are fearful. Many people are in mass hysteria. And yet God has placed you and I as believers in this world at this time so that we can provide peace, so that we can show these people the love of God, so that we can show them that God is still over all, that nothing is taking God by surprise. And so God has placed you where He wants you to be, and God wants to use you where you are. And so it's up to us to do what God wants us to do, to help the people around us, to share God's love and his peace. And that's the light for the day. Will you allow God to use you during this time of crisis for such a time as this? And that's light for the day. Have a great day.